Brother Webster, correction. Would you take hold of the microphone, please?
Thank you very much, Brother Blake. Good evening, my brothers and my sisters. Good to be joining you once again. I want to say thanks to you for having invited me to share with you on this important subject as you continue. I notice another month of study on stewardship, and I trust that the next couple of weeks as we explore stewardship, that indeed we will be challenged and we'll become a better people in terms of how we, okay. Okay, want my microphone to be turned up. All right, give me a minute. Let me see if I can turn this up. All right, you're hearing me louder?
Very clear, Reverend Webster.
Okay, all right, excellent, excellent. All right, so as I said, thank you for having invited me to share with you. It has been a very long day for me. We had the funeral service in Westmoreland for the mother of the Reverend Devon Madan, and a number of us as pastors journeyed to support him in that burial there of his mom. So it has been a very long day, but I am happy that I'm able to join you in this study tonight. I want to, in the last series I did with you on stewardship, we looked at stewardship of purpose, and we looked at stewardship of passion. In this particular series, I want us to focus on the stewardship of giving, the stewardship of giving. And I have entitled the series Stewardship of Giving, Guiding Principles for Godly Giving. And how we're going to approach it tonight is that you're going to be going into breakout rooms first and foremost. And then after the presentation of the breakout groups, then we'll go to the scriptures to do the study. And I'm certain that, you know, the conversations that will be held in the breakout rooms and brought back to the general body will be beneficial to the understanding of the study that we're going to be doing tonight. I'm not even going to mention to you where we're going to actually be studying. I'm going to be asking Brother Rattray to be putting us into groups. I'll just tell you what the groups are going to be doing. Group 1 is going to be looking, or room 1 is going to be looking at what are some of the guiding principles, what are some of the guidelines for giving by the church? What are some of the guidelines for giving by the church? Room number 2, to what extent should giving be done by the church or individuals? To what extent? What is the levels to which giving should be done by individuals or by the church? To what extent should we be going? And room number 3 is going to look at, is it right for the church to go begging opportunities to give? Should the church be out there seeking out for opportunities, begging people to come to us, begging people to come to it, so that it can give to these needs or wants? Is it right for the church, or should the church wait for persons to express their need and then to examine the need to see whether or not it is something that the church wants to give to? So is it right for the church to go begging? If you say yes, why do you say yes as a group? If you say no, why, naturally, why do you say no? So those are the 3 breakout rooms, and you're going to be given only 15 minutes to discuss it through somebody from the group to make the presentation to the wider body, and we're going to proceed like that. So, Brother Rattray.
They should be back with you in another 15 seconds or so, Reverend. 17 seconds.
All right, no problem. Thank you.
Okay, Rev, all yours.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Trust you had some vibrant discussions. I know the time is limited, but I'm certain that you were able to have some vibrant discussions in your various groups. So let us get quickly into it because time is running against us. So let's hear from room one. What are some guidelines for giving by the church? What are some guidelines for giving by the church?
Good evening, Brother Webster. Cornell here, Richards.
Good evening, Sir Richards.
Yes, and our group, although we didn't have the time, but we look at some very, good stuff. And we should be not givers that are sparingly, that we shouldn't give sparingly, but we should be willing givers. We should be very willing givers. And also, we should inculcate a position of generosity. And we should carry out this function of giving as we give unto the Lord, that we give to the poor and helping those who are in need, and things like mission and other functions that will help the church to spread. And also it was said that we should demonstrate the heart of Christ, a grateful and generous disposition as followers of him.
All right.
Is that okay?
Well, yes, that's what the group came up with, and I appreciate it. So, so you shouldn't give sparingly is one guideline.
Yes.
We should be willing givers.
Yes.
The matter of generosity.
Yes.
Church should give to the poor, missions, so on and so forth. Anything that advances the cause of the church.
Kingdom. Yes.
And must exhibit the heart of Christ.
Yes.
In that matter of giving. And
yes.
Let me just bring in the chat. Elder Rooms is highlighting Luke 6:27-42. That connects love, blessing, not cursing, love, generosity, and not judging others. As food for thought when it comes to inculcating a spirit of generosity as followers of Christ. All right, so those are some key guidelines that room one came up with. All right, thank you very much, room one. Let's hear room two. To what extent should giving be done by the church or individuals? Room two. Who's making a presentation for room two? Silence. Okay. All right, let's go to room three. We'll come back to room two. Room three, is it right for the church to go begging opportunities to give?
I am on room two.
Okay.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry, I was muted.
Okay.
All right. We looked at giving as an individual and giving to the by the church. Now, as an individual, we will have resources, some money, your time, or you're giving of yourself. And you search for opportunities to give. You will see them because you won't, around you, there's always opportunities for those things. And in giving, we would be reaching out to others, maybe persons who really and truly down and out, persons who are in dire needs or just need something. And you could do that by doing many things, a number of things. You give up money. You give by kind, what you have, kind, giving kind. You can give up your time. This is very, very important. And we know these days, time is with all these lockdowns and curfews and so on. it's very difficult to even schedule your life, but still you'll want to find the opportunity to give because you do care. And out of these, you'll find new meaning to your life when you can do some of these things. As a church, we look at the church being able to. The church is usually in a setting, and around you'll have an environment. You look for needs in the environment where you operate from, and even though you're doing evangelism, which is a need to spread the gospel, right? So you're giving up your time and what you have learned and your experience being a Christian and so on. So you'll be sharing. Needs in the environment could be people have physical needs, those things that has to be met. And we saw Jesus when the people gathered, it wasn't a case that he said, oh boy, what do I do now? And there was food because that's part of the needs that people have. And he was able to supply, to satisfy some needs there. So, all in all, it really means that we have to look out for those needs that others have and give of ourselves. Also, you can give of yourself to God and then ask Him to direct your path and use it for His purpose. Sometimes we get into stations and we figure that, yes, this is what I should do. But really and truly, you may not be doing what God wants you to do. So sometimes we just need to step back and ask Him, Lord, just lead me. Show me what I need to do. So that is what we came up in within our group.
All right, thank you very much, Brother Willis. Appreciate that. So you say the group is saying that individuals can search for opportunities to give, reach out to others, give money, time, those kinds of things. The church can be focused on giving to take care of the physical needs of others, giving of ourselves, giving of itself to God, and so on and so forth. What was the last thing you said?
Yeah, and I mentioned evangelism because you are gonna give of your experience serving God, and that can certainly help people, persons, to move on the path of living a Christian life.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Room 2. All right. Let's hear the big one now. Room 3. Is it right for the church to go begging opportunities to give? Room 3.
The opinions expressed were varied. Some voices said, no, we ought not to go outside the boundaries of the church to beg. And personally, I think we should go to people who have a heart for giving. And I've run into a lot of people in business who would want to give to the church. It probably bombs their very heart, but would want to give to the church offerings from time to time, and especially at Christmas time when we are celebrating the birth of Christ. Others think we need to seek help, but not necessarily coming from businesses that are not church acquainted, that we should not accept from people who are not church acquainted. And some people suggested that the church ought to seek sponsorship. We have a Word for Jamaica broadcast, and in the past we have sought sponsorship. One man did come up with a yes, but as time went by, he backed away. So we managed to continue the broadcast nevertheless. So yes, I would certainly advocate going to people who are considered able and capable of giving without any ulterior motives.
All right, you finished, Brother Blake?
Yes, sir.
All right. Unfortunately, room 3 misunderstood the question. The question was, is it right for the church to go begging opportunities to give? Not begging opportunities to receive. Basically, the question was saying, should the church go there and beg people to come to us for money? We have things to give to you. And instead of waiting around for people to come, should the church go begging for those opportunities to give? Very different.
Yes.
So
I'm sure we misunderstood your reference, because it is not usual for the church to beg people to come. It is the other way around.
Well,
but we understand fully.
That's why the question is placed there. The unusual nature of things. There has to be some question there that is pretty unusual.
Yes, an 80-year-old hears questions a little differently. But I apologize for that.
But
if I may, good evening.
Yes,
if I
go
may
ahead.
come in, I was in room 3, and giving is not necessarily monetary. It can be a service. And like, for example, we have an annual outreach healthcare club that we appeal to people to come, and we offer medical assistance. And I think that's an opportunity that the church welcomes to give. So
and the church
that's my
promotes
point.
it,
That's one way of giving.
of the service.
Sorry?
You're saying that the church promotes it and invites people to come to make use of the service.
Service.
Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. So thank you very much. Now, these 3 questions that have been asked and answered will provide the background for our study tonight. And let us see what the Word of God has to say in regards to all these things. Are there some guidelines that we can pull from the scriptures concerning giving by the church? Is there an extent to which the church or individuals in the church should give? And should the church go begging for opportunities to give? If you have your Bibles, we get into the Bible. So let's go to 2 Corinthians. While you're turning there, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, I'm going to start sharing my screen. So Ratri, I'm allowed?
Yes, sir. You are co-host.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me start sharing my screen with you. So we're talking about stewardship, the stewardship of giving, guiding principles for godly giving. And we are going to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And for this evening, we're focusing our attention on the first 6 verses. If you do have the time, read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, because both chapters, the Apostle Paul spends some extensive time dealing with the matter of giving. And he speaks to the purpose and the policies of giving, and the readiness to give, and so on and so forth. Let me read the first 6 verses of chapter 8. And I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. He says, "Now, brethren," he's speaking to the Corinthian people, "we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given in the churches of Macedonia, that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. For I testified that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord, begging us with much entreaty for the favor of participation in the support of the saints. And this, not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. Verse 6. Consequently, we urge Titus that as he had previously made a beginning, so he would also complete in you this gracious work as well. We stop there. Very important and an interesting paragraph to examine as we talk about this matter of giving and the stewardship of it. How do we manage the giving? How do we manage giving as a church? How do we manage giving as a people? And the Apostle Paul uses the Macedonian church as an example to the Corinthian church. And let me give you a background very quickly. The Corinthian church is considered to have been a more affluent church that they had more resources available, financial and otherwise. A church that had committed itself to supporting the ministry of the Apostle Paul. And you will see the Apostle Paul in writing to the Corinthians, reminding them of their commitment to give to the ministry, and reminding them that when they gathered on the first day of the week, they were to collect the offering that they promised so that it could be received. You read in verse 6, him saying, I am sending Titus to you to collect it. You have made this commitment. You have the wherewithal to carry through your commitment, but you have failed to carry out your commitment. And so he uses the Macedonian church as a motivation to say to the Corinthian church, hey, look at the Macedonian church. Look at what they have done. Look at how they have given. You remember the Macedonian church. You go back to the book of Acts and you read Acts chapters 16 and 17. Paul is on his second missionary journey, and he receives what we call, if you remember, a Macedonian call to come over and to help us, the Macedonian people. We're talking about northern Greece and southern Greece, as we know the land masses today. Macedonia is the landmass of Greece as we know it today. So the northern part of Greece, northern Macedonia, southern Macedonia, the churches of Thessalonica, a group of churches in Thessalonica region, to whom the Apostle Paul wrote the Epistle of Thessalonians. And you will recall that these were persons that the Apostle Paul, this was a church, and these were churches that Apostle Paul helped to form. You had the churches of Philippi, and you had the church in Berea. And you remember that particular church, when they heard the gospel, they did not, immediately accept it. One of the things that stands out about them is that they went and they studied the scriptures, discovered that what the apostles were saying, what Paul in particular was saying was true, and then they accepted it. It is interesting that the churches in the region, in the Macedonian region, when you read the letters that Paul wrote to the Thessalonians and the Philippians, for example, he talks to them a lot about their faith and their work of love, and he commends them for the transformation, the change that has taken place in their lives. One of the key things, especially when he wrote to the Philippians, that he said to them, is that my God shall supply all your need. Everybody knows that verse, eh? Everybody in church. My God shall supply all your need. Philippians 4:19, according to his riches in glory. What most persons do not know is the context in which that particular verse was written. And the context is that the Philippian church, the churches in Macedonia region, which included the Philippian church, were not churches of great affluence. They never had a lot of money. The resources were limited. However, they were a set of persons who committed themselves to supporting the ministry of the Apostle Paul. And they carried through on their commitment to give. Listen to the words of the Apostle Paul to them in Philippians 4. Let me read verse 10 and then let me read verse 15. He says, but I rejoice in the Lord greatly that now at your last, your care for me has flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. And then he goes on in verse 15. Now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in Thessalonica, you sent aid once and again for my necessities. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account. Indeed, I have all and abound. I am full, having received from Epaphroditus the things which were sent from you, a sweet-smelling aroma, an acceptable sacrifice, well-pleasing to God. And my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. So the example that the Apostle Paul is highlighting to the Corinthian people concerning this matter of giving is the church in the region of Macedonia, Thessalonica, Philippi region, Berea, so on and so forth. So if we go back to 2 Corinthians 8 and the guiding principles for godly giving that the Apostle Paul shares using the example of the Macedonian church, we see in verse 1 what I call the foundational truth. Brethren, we wish to make known to you the grace of God which has been given to the churches of Macedonia. What's the foundational truth of giving? The foundational truth of giving is that the grace of God, the gifts of God, that word grace carries can also be translated gifts. The gifts of God were received by the church in Macedonia. God gave unto them. So whatever amounts they had, it was given to them by God. Remember what we said weeks ago when we began the series on stewardship, that a steward is a manager on behalf of someone else. You have received a particular thing to manage. You're not the owner. And so the Macedonian church was able to give because God had given to them. They had been recipients of the grace of God. They had been recipients of the gifts of God. Whatever they had, it was God who gave it to them. And it didn't matter how much or how little, they clearly had an understanding that that which we possess comes from God. The second thing I highlight is what I consider to be the source of test. If you notice in verse 2, it says that in a great ordeal of affliction, their abundance of joy and their deep poverty overflowed in the wealth of their liberality. So there are three sources of tests that the Macedonian church endured. In their walk with God, they suffered great affliction. It is one of the regions that suffered much affliction. Read Acts chapter 16. You will see how the Jews went down there to disturb the kinds of things that were going on in Thessalonica. When you read the letter that the Apostle Paul writes to the Thessalonians, you will see him talking to them about not giving up, about understanding that you have been saved, that the day, the night will not overtake you, the day of the Lord rather will not overtake you like a thief in the night. You don't have to be worrying about these things. You're struggling through these things, but God has you covered. You read his writing to the Philippians, and he talks about the struggles, the afflictions. I like verse 6 of chapter 1 of Philippians, when he says that you can be confident, Philippians, of this very thing, that he who hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. And he shares his life with them. For me to live is Christ, to die is gain. And you're going to face some persecutions, you're going to face some challenges, but when you face them, make sure that by prayer and supplication, you take them to God. Don't be anxious about anything. In your great affliction, it is only about testing your faith and your confidence. So this region of churches experienced great affliction. Secondly, they had an abundance of joy. Despite the affliction, they were overjoyed because of their relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Again, you read the letter to the Thessalonians, and the Apostle Paul talks about, I am celebrating, I rejoice about your joy in the Lord, how you received the gospel and how it changed your life, the metamorphosis that has taken place in your lives. And you read Philippians and he says, rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. And there's this abundance of joy that these churches experience because of their relationship with God. Going through affliction, but still counting it all joy. And we read that in the letter written by James. Count it all joy when you fall into various trials and temptations. This group of churches experienced that and demonstrated that. But they also had deep poverty. Paul says, you had deep poverty. These were really financially poor people. Yet they were able, through these sources of testing, I call them, they were able to become an example to a church like the Corinthian church that had greater resources. But you see in the Corinthian church that despite the greatness of their resources, the Corinthian church did not have the kind of unity that these other churches had, did not have the kind of joy that these other churches had. So when you read 1 Corinthians, you see Paul talking about the divisions and the schisms in the Corinthian church. You see the kind of sinfulness that is going on. So much so that at one stage he would have to say to them, there's that young man who is having a relationship with his father's wife. Listen to me, put him out to the devil. Let the devil afflict him, and go back after him to win him back to the Lord. All kinds of things. There are people who were supporting one set of leader against the other. Some are of Paul, some are of Apollos, and all kinds of division. There is a misunderstanding of spiritual things. You see the challenge about those who felt that speaking in tongues was more important than loving, and the prophetic ministry was placed aside, and all those kinds of things were going on in the Corinthian church, despite the great levels of resources that they had. They made promises, but never carried through on the promises. Paul highlights the Macedonian church as an example. Look at these guys. Look what they have been through. Look at their relationship with God. Look at the joy. In spite of having nothing, they are rejoicing in the Lord. They are in deep poverty, but there is a joy of the Lord. Then we see what I call the resultant triumph. The latter part of verse 2 says that they were not only tested by great affliction, they had this abundance of joy, they had deep poverty, but it resulted in an overflowing in the wealth of their liberality. In other words, that word liberality can also be translated generosity. They became a generous people out of their poverty. That is why Paul wrote the Philippians and said, my God shall supply all your need according to his riches and glory. We must understand the context in which that is written. It is that the Philippian church were given to the ministry of the Apostle Paul as they promised out of what they did not have. They were managing the little. They were managing the little. Fact of the matter is that everybody has been given something. And it doesn't matter whether or not it is little or much. Everybody has been given something. Every church has been given something. Every church has the ability to give and to give out of their need, So that was the resultant liberality. But there are some things that drove this liberality. Verse 3, for I testify that according to their ability. So what drove their generosity? The Macedonian church gave according to their ability. It is interesting that Jesus himself had given the story of the woman, the widow's mite, and the fact that what she gave was a far better quality of giving than the one who gave much and beat his chest. The widow gave little in terms of value, but much in terms of the quality of the gift. Paul is saying to the Corinthian church, this is exactly what happened with the Macedonian church. They gave according to their ability. Now, if we were to take, for example, let me bring something very clear with you. I have examined the Missionary Church, for example, over the many years. And I have had the opportunity of looking at our reports, for example, to conference. And on an annual basis, we report in excess of $100 million of income across the denomination. If you were to use a measuring stick, and Elder Rooms is in the room. If you were to use a measuring stick as is recommended for a baseline given to missions as being 10% baseline, 10% of your income, it would mean that the missionary church collectively in Jamaica would be on an annual basis be given a minimum $10 million to missions alone. According to our ability, we're not doing like what the Macedonians are doing. And if we were to take individual churches, and if we were to take our own individual lives, look at the ability we have. How are we managing our abilities to give? What are some guiding principles for godly giving? Well, here are some. Paul highlights as he wrote to the Corinthian people. They gave according to their ability. Second thing, they did not only give according to their ability. Look at it. Verse 3. For I testify that according to their ability, and him say, and beyond their ability. So they were given according to their ability. But you know what? They were also given beyond their ability. Yes, we can give this amount, but we will give more. And earlier on, one group talked about giving or time, for example. How much time do we as individuals give? Do we give time above our ability? Do we sacrifice to give time to the cause of Christ, to the things of Christ? When we're talking about giving, we're not just talking about money, but money is also important. But we're talking about giving of our time, giving of our talents, whatever we're giving according to our ability, giving beyond our ability. And thirdly, it says they were given of their own accord, meaning they were not being pressured into giving. The Macedonian church was not being coerced into giving. They were given of their own accord. This was something that they made a commitment on their own to give. They heard about the opportunity and they made a commitment to give. We're talking about guiding principles for godly giving. Verse 5 tells us about the basis for the motivation to give. It says, and this, not as we had expected, but they first gave themselves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. Two bases of motivation. Number one, priority. These Macedonian people understood prioritization. They gave themselves to the Lord first. Part of the challenge, I think, that we face as individuals and as local congregations, churches, is that it might be said that we're not giving ourselves to God totally. We give him a part of us, but we hold back a part. You can utilize this ability of mine, but this over here, this is mine. Off boundary, off limits for you, God. The Macedonian church gave themselves totally to the Lord. Whatever they had, whoever they were, they gave themselves to the Lord. That was the basis of their giving. That was what drove their ability to give beyond their ability, their ability to give out of their poverty. A statement I've always made in a missionary church is that I dislike hearing the statement that we don't have the resources, because I believe that that is a lie from the very pit of hell. The missionary church collectively have the resources. Every member of the missionary church that God has brought together in this body called the missionary church, all the resources we all possess are resources, grace that have been given to us. The challenge we have is that we have not given ourselves to the Lord as priority. But here's the second basis. They not only gave themselves to the Lord first, but they gave themselves to the apostles. In other words, they gave themselves to the support of the apostles' work. We understand your calling. We understand the purpose. We understand that you are out there moving from place to place, having to take ship and boat and, travel across lands and seas to take the gospel. You're going to have need for food, you name it. And so they gave themselves, they availed themselves to the apostles. Whatever we have, the Macedonian church would say, it's available for you. Whatever you want, we'll give it to you. We don't have much, but we give it to you. So they avail themselves. And that provided the motivation for giving by the Macedonian church. Here's the last thing before I take your questions and we close. I go back to verse 4, deliberately left it out. And it answers the third question, room 3. Verse 4 says, begging us, Paul is writing, begging us, the apostles, with much entreaty for the favor of participation in the support of the saints. The Macedonian attitude in giving was an attitude where they went begging opportunities to participate. You know what most of us do as individuals and churches? We say, well, if they have a need, they'll write to us. They'll come asking us. That's not what the Macedonian church did. That's not the example that the Apostle Paul is presenting to the Corinthian church as the godly attitude in giving. He says, these people, in their poverty, went out there looking for opportunity and begging the apostles for opportunity to participate in giving. How often do we see that in church? How often do we see individuals write into a missions group, for example, write into a church that is struggling, write in to a body of individuals who are involved in ministry and saying, listen to me, we have some money. How can we invest this money in your ministry? How can we invest this money in what you're doing? How often do you see that happening? Now we see international agencies putting out call for funding and for proposals for funding. How often do you see the church, the body of Christ, putting out calls for invitation to access funding? That is exactly what the Macedonian church did. They begged for opportunities to participate in giving and in the support of ministry. So what are some godly attitudes that we need to have in our giving? Learning from the Macedonian church. First thing, know the foundation. That all that we have received it from God, grace of God. Know also that a critical guiding principle is that out of our relationship with God and our struggles as people of God, we need to rejoice. We need to give thanks for that which we are going through, that which we have. And we need to also be very generous in our giving. First of all, begin with our ability to give. Then grow into giving beyond our ability. Stretch the pocket. 20 million annual income. How much of that we put away? And so we're saving up for a rainy day. There's no rainy day in the ministry and in the kingdom of God. How much do we give beyond our abilities? How much do we give of our own accord without anybody asking? I see the need. We see the need from over here, and we're going to give to it. That is a guiding principle from the Macedonian church. They gave themselves to the Lord first, and then they availed themselves to the apostles. And finally, wow, they went begging for opportunities to give. Stewardship of giving, part 1. Your questions or comments? Silence.
Well, Rev, that you really took us to task there, I must say. But even so, there was a question about the begging to give. And I mean, when you look at a church that is in an environment that is, what would you say, lacking. I don't want to call the name of any community, for I don't want to put them in a spot. But you live in your church is in an environment that is lacking in a lot of resources. The church doesn't beg for opportunities to give. The church recognizes the lack in the opportunity and goes forth to deal with those that are in need. So how do you handle the so-called giving of that church? I mean, their neighborhood is not affluent to begin with, but they are making the effort to alleviate the suffering that they see around them. They're not going out to beg for the opportunity. So what do you say to something like that?
That's part of giving. That is part of giving. And when you get to chapter 9, you will probably see some of that coming out. So that's part of giving. The challenge we have is not with the average regular giving that the church does. The giving to the poor. The challenge that a particular church like that would have, if I was having a conversation with them, is whether or not they are giving according to their ability or they are giving above their ability. That would become the measuring stick of whether the quality of their giving was of a high standard biblically, based on the example the Apostle Paul uses in sharing with the Corinthians. Sometimes what you find is that local churches will indicate, well, we gave $5 million, we gave $1 million to missions this year, and they applaud themselves because $1 million is a whole heap of money when compared to the level of giving by others of like faith. But while that might be commendable, the question is, when you look at the example before us, is that proportionate to the ability of the local church to give? And by extension, I talk about denomination too. The extent of a denomination giving. And I give an example. When I pastored Belmont Missionary Church for only 4 years, but these are still near and dear people to my heart. And I know we have some Hopewell folks with us now, but it's true. But in 2004, when I became pastor, Hurricane Ivan hit. Hurricane Ivan, yes, did some damage in Jamaica, but extensively damaged Grenada, for example. The reports at the time was that 80% of the housing stock in Grenada were damaged. Belmont Missionary Church was a very poor church. When I got there in 2004, they told me, Pastor, we can't even give you $30,000 a month as we have agreed to. And we don't even collect that in tithes and offering for the month. But what they had, and I told them then, don't worry about it. The Lord will supply. I tell you, there was never a month I never got it in the 4 years, and it grew to $50,000. By the time I got to Hopewell was paying me less than Belmont. You'll be surprised. But anyway, they had resources, not financial, but to this very day, they had gifted people in music, gifted people in certain skills, carpenters, masons, right? All those kinds of skills that were required in Grenada. So what I did is that I brought the church to understand we do not have the financial resources, but the skills and abilities are available. We need to take these skills and go help. So we made contact with the Berean Bible Church in Grenada and said, how can we come over and help you? And they told us how we could. We went about raising funds, and we made sacrifice, and 13 persons left and went to Grenada for 1 week to help with the reconstruction of a church, removing the damaged roof and preparing it for decking, putting in 12 columns, 1 week. And we did all of that. And I'm telling you that the guys, when they came back, the drive and the enthusiasm and the spiritual depth was greatly improved to this very day, because they sought an opportunity out of their poverty to give. I can give you many other examples. So it is not so much how much is being done, it is the quality of what is being done, whether or not it is being done beyond ability, to the point where it becomes a matter of faith. Church has become too much sight. This is how much money, and too many business people sometimes running church. Sorry, but I have to say it. And while those business principles are correct and good, yet church is driven by faith. No, if you are not experiencing faith in giving, then you're really not experiencing much of God, because the just shall live by faith. So give away everything you have and live by faith. Trust God and see what happens. You're good, Brother Ratchet, for that?
To a great extent, yes. But I think when you got into the second half of what you were saying, where you moved away from resources being looked at as financial and more into the resources being the abilities that God has placed in each person to be able to give, then there's another sphere of giving that opens up to you, because then you can actually give of your ability as you did in construction or something else that can address a need that you may not be able to address, the hunger that you see or the nakedness that you see. I mean, so yeah, your second half kind of got me thinking differently.
All right, appreciate it. Sister Kelly, you had your mic on once.
Yes, I was just.
And back over to Brother Blake. Go ahead, Sister Kelly.
Yes, thank you. I was just, I've been listening, and especially on giving. And one of the things that I was saying, that because today in the local church, oftentimes we think that there is not enough money and you're not giving. And one of the things that just came to my mind is that, is it that we don't have the money, or is that we are not being good stewards of the gift that God has given us? And as a result of not using God's money, the gift that God has given us wisely and in the right area, as a result of that, you find that, there is always a shortfall. So that is something that we need to look at, how we manage the gift. And if we manage it well, I believe that we will find that, we will have enough. So I think sometimes it's not the amount of money, but it's how are we managing, the gift that God has given us. Because sometimes sometimes we do use it foolishly, and when the time comes for the things that is really needed, it is not there for mission, because sometimes we use it, doing other things that are not really important. So that is something that we need to really ponder and ask the Lord to help us, especially at this time in COVID. A lot of people won't have a lot to give. And so we have to, look into ourselves and say, Lord, there's not a lot coming, but we can use the little, that you have given us, and to use it in such a way that, it serves the church, and it serves the kingdom. So that is something that we need to look at. It's not the amount, but what we do with the gift that God has entrusted to us.
All right, I appreciate that. All right, any other question, comment? If not,
Rev, Anthony,
yes, sir.
I what just came to mind, so what Sister Barbara just said, is that there's also another gift that we have in managing the resources that God has given us. For instance, there are persons even within the church or the churches that who are gifted in financial management and can, for instance, nothing wrong with if the multiplication comes through the gifts that God has given us in terms of being able to invest or to wisely apply whatever little, they're turning little into much. And one of the things when you talk about just the gifts that we have, it includes not just the monetary gifts, but the ability to allow the church to make money in terms of applying wisdom in how we manage and how we deal with the resources that God has given us. And something I would wish to say too is that we should never be defined by what we have, but by how we give, how much we give. And so some persons place a high value on how much they give. And I think we have to be very careful that we equate how much we give with the importance and the authority that will come with it. And you referred to the widow's mite. If we give $1 million, the value is no more than the one who gives $1 and gives it sincerely from the heart. So we have to be very mindful the value we place on the amount of how much we give. Thanks.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Ella Clinton. And I'll just make a statement, a short one, concerning the latter part of what you said, because I think it needs to be understood that the individual who gives, quote unquote, a large amount, the quality of that giving is whether or not that gift was according to their ability. And in one of my churches, I've said to them, listen to me. There was a night we did a particular exercise. We were talking about the same matter of giving and so on. We did an exercise where we said, don't tell us your salary. You don't have to give us correct figures, but on this piece of paper, don't write your name or anything. Just indicate your average salary. And of all the persons that were there, we took it and then we added it up, and then we found 10% of it. And the 10% we found of it would say, this is really the tithe that should be coming in. And right, that's one. The second thing is that I remember saying, okay, an individual who is earning $10,000 per week, but gives $3,000 out of that $10,000 per week, compared to an individual who is earning $300,000 a week, but only gives $5,000 of it. Yes, more money is given, but the percentage and therefore the quality of the gift based on the ability of the individual is vastly reduced. We got to understand that when you compare the Macedonian church and the Philippian church, in terms, that's why we have to go to the quality of the giving and not necessarily the quantity of the giving, but the quality of it.
Mhm. Yes.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah, but Rev, based on all of it I've been hearing, subsequent discussions, aren't we generally making the error of considering gift financially and not necessarily just in terms of ability? Because everything we work out is, when you say the and I could be getting it wrong, when you speak about the ability to give, we seem to consistently be boiling it down to your ability in financial terms and not just your ability in terms of gifts or anything else that you do.
Well, in the case of the example given by the Apostle Paul of the Macedonian church, it had to do with finance. I have broadened the discussion to include talents and abilities, right? And we could do that. We could monetize the gifts and talents. An individual, for example, who has a skill, utilizes the skill in the local church without charging the local church. I believe the local church should put a monetary value to it, to say, this is actually what the church has saved. This is what the individual has invested in terms of their gift to the church. And so I believe that that's part of how we need to approach church management. So yeah. All right, but time has gone. Thank you very much. Lord's willing, we pick this up next week. We continue the discussion on the stewardship of giving. Are there some other principles that we can learn through the writings of the Apostle Paul? So I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Continue to read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 as we explore these two chapters over the next 2 weeks. Brother Blake.